Chapter 31. The Photograph. The next day was most peculiar, as Mrs. Partridge would say. Phoebe arrived at school with another message which she had found on her porch that morning. We never know the worth of water until the well is dry. It's a clue, Phoebe said. Maybe my mother is hidden in a well. I walked straight into Ben when I went to my locker. That grapefruit aroma was in the air. You've got something on your face, he said. With soft, warm fingers, he rubbed the side of my face. It's probably your breakfast. I don't know what came over me. I was going to kiss him. I leaned forward just as he turned around and slammed the door of his locker. My lips ended up pressed against the cold metal locker. You're weird, Sal, he said. Kissing was thumpingly complicated. Both people had to be in the same place at the same time, and both people had to remain still so that the kiss ended up in the right place. But I was relieved that my lips had ended up on the cold metal locker. I could not imagine what had come over me, or what might have happened if the kiss had landed on Ben's mouth. It was a shivery thing to consider. I made it through the rest of my classes without losing control of my lips. Mr. Berkway sailed into class carrying our journals. I had forgotten all about them. He was leaping all over the place, exclaiming, "Dynamite! Unbelievable! Incredible!" He said he couldn't wait to share the journals with the class. Mary Lou Finney said, "Share with the class?" Mr. Berkway said, "Not to worry, everyone has something magnificent to say. I haven't read through every page yet, but I wanted to share some of these passages with you right away." People were squirming all over the room. I was trying to remember what I had written. Mary Lou leaned over to me and said, "Well, I'm not worried. I wrote a special note in the front of mine distinctly asking him not to read it. Mine was private." Mr. Berkway smiled at each nervous face. "You needn't worry," he said. I'll change any names that you've used, and I'll fold this piece of yellow paper over the cover of whichever journal I'm reading, so that you won't know whose it is." Ben asked if he could go to the bathroom. Christy said she felt sick and begged to see the nurse. Phoebe asked me to touch her forehead because she was pretty sure she had a fever. Usually Mr. Berkway would let people go to the bathroom or to the nurse, but this time he said, "Let's not malinger." He picked up a journal, slipping the yellow paper over it before anyone had a chance to examine the cover for clues as to its author's identity. Everyone took a deep breath. You could see people poised nervously, waiting as tensely as if Mr. Berkway was going to announce someone's execution. Mr. Berkway read, "I think that Betty," he changed the name you could tell because there was no Betty in our school, "will go to hell because she always takes the Lord's name in vain. She says God every 5 seconds. Mary Lou Finney was turning purple. "Who wrote that?" she said. "Did you, Christy? I'll bet you did." Christy stared down at her desk. "I do not say God every 5 seconds. I do not, and I'm not going to hell. Omnipotent. That's what I say now. I say omnipotent and Alpha and Omega." Mr. Berkway was desperately trying to explain what he had enjoyed about the passage. He said that most of us are not aware that we might be using the words, such as God, that offend other people. Mary Lou leaned over to me and said, "Is he serious? Does he actually really and truly believe that Beef-Brain Christy is troubled by my saying God? Which I do not, by the way, say anymore anyway." Christy wore a pious look, as if God himself had just come down from heaven to sit on her desk. Mr. Berkway quickly selected another journal. He read, "Linda," there was no Linda in our class either, "is my best friend. I tell her just about everything and she tells me everything, even things I do not want to know, like what she ate for breakfast and what her father wears to bed and how much her new sweater cost. Sometimes things like that are just not interesting." Mr. Berkeley liked this passage because it showed that even though someone might be our best friend, he or she could still drive us crazy. Beth Ann turned all the way around in her seat and sent wicked eyebrow messages to Mary Lou. Mr. Berkeley flipped ahead in the same journal to another passage. He read, I think Jeremiah is pig-headed. His skin is always pink and his hair is always clean and shiny, but he's really a jerk. I thought Mary Lou Finney was going to fall out of her chair. Alex was bright, bright pink. He looked at Mary Lou as if she had recently plunged a red-hot stake into his heart. Mary Lou said, No, it isn't what you think. Mr. Berkeley liked this passage because it showed conflicting feelings about someone. I'll say it does, Alex said. The bell rang. First you could hear sighs of relief from the people whose journals had not been read, and then people started talking a mile a minute. Hey, Mary Lou, look at Alex's pink skin. And, hey, Mary Lou, what does Beth Ann's father wear to bed? Beth Ann was standing 1 inch away from Mary Lou's face. I do not talk on and on, Beth Ann said, and that wasn't very nice of you to mention that, and I do not tell you everything, and the only reason I ever mentioned what my father wore to bed was because we were talking, if you will recall, about men's bathing suits being more comfortable than women's, and on she went. Mary Lou was trying to get across the room to Alex, who was standing there as pink as can be. Alex, she called, wait, I wrote that before, wait. It was a jing-bang of a mess. I was glad I had to get out of there. Phoebe and I were going to the police again. We got in to see Sergeant Bickle right away. Phoebe slapped the newest message about the water in the well onto his desk, dumped the hairs which she had collected at Mrs. Cadaver's house on top of the message, and then placed her list of further items to investigate on top of that. Sergeant Bickle frowned. I don't think you girls understand. Phoebe went into a rage. You idiot, she said. She scooped up the message, the hairs, and her list and stormed out of the office. Sergeant Bickle followed her while I waited, thinking he would bring Phoebe back and calm her down. I looked at the photographs on his desk, the ones I had not been able to see the day before. In one was Sergeant Bickle and a friendly-looking woman, his wife, I suppose. The second picture was of a shiny black car. The third picture was of Sergeant Bickle, the woman, and a young man, their son, I figured. I looked closer. I recognized the son. It was the lunatic. Chapter 32. Chicken and Blackberry Kisses. Gramps barreled through Wyoming like a house afire. We snaked through winding roads where the trees leaned close, rustling. Rush, 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 rush. The road curved alongside rivers that rolled and gabbled. Hurry, hurry, hurry. It was late when we arrived at Yellowstone. All we got to see that evening was a hot spring. We walked on boardwalks placed across the bubbling mud. Huzzah, huzzah, Graham said. And we stayed at the Old Faithful Inn in a frontier cabin. I'd never seen Graham so excited. She could not wait for the next morning. We're gonna see Old Faithful, she said over and over. It won't take too very long, will it? I said, and I felt like a mule saying it because Graham was so looking forward to it. Don't you worry, Salamanca, Graham said. We'll just watch that old geyser blow and then we'll hit the road. I prayed all night long to the elm tree outside. I prayed that we would not get in an accident, that we would get to Lewiston, Idaho in time for my mother's birthday, and that we would bring her home. Later I would realize that I had prayed for the wrong things. That night, Graham was so excited that she could not sleep. She rambled on about all sorts of things. She said to Gramps, Remember that letter from the Eggman that you found under the mattress? Of course, I remember we had a wing-ding of an argument over it. You told me you had no dang idea how it got there. You said the Eggman must have slipped into the bedroom and put it there. Well, I want you to know that I put it there. I know that, Gramps said. I'm not a complete noodle. It's the only love letter anybody ever wrote me, Gramps said. You never wrote me any love letters. You never told me you wanted one. To me, Gramps said. Your grandfather nearly killed the Eggman over that letter. Hell's bells, Gramps said. He wasn't worth killing. Maybe not, but Gloria was. Ah, yes, Gramps said, placing his hand on his heart and pretending to swoon. Gloria. Cut that out, Gramps said, rolling over on her side. Tell me about Peebee. Tell me that story, but don't make it too awfully sad. She folded her hands on her chest. Tell me what happened with the lunatic. When I saw the picture of the lunatic on Sergeant Bickle's desk, I tore out of that office faster than lightning. I ran past Sergeant Bickle standing in the parking lot, no sign of Phoebe. I ran all the way to her house. As I passed Mrs. Cadaver's house, Mrs. Partridge called to me from her porch. You're all dressed up, I said. Going somewhere? Oh, yes, she said. I'm readable. She torted down the steps, swinging her cobra cane in front of her. Are you walking? I asked. She reached down and touched her legs. Isn't that what you call it when you move your legs like I'm doing? No, I meant are you walking to wherever you're going? Oh no, it's much too far for these legs. Jim is coming, he'll be here any minute. A car pulled up in front of the house. There he is, she said. She called out to the driver. I'm readable, I said. I said I would be, and here I am. The driver leaped out of the car. So, he said, I had no idea you two were neighbors. It was Mr. Berkway. We're not, I said. It's Phoebe who is the neighbor. Is that right? He said, opening the car door for Mrs. Partridge. Come on, Mom, let's get a move on. Mom? I said. I looked at Mrs. Partridge. This is your son? Why, of course, Mrs. Partridge said. This is my little Jimmy. But he's a Berkway. Mrs. Partridge said, I was a Berkway once, then I was a partridge. I'm still a partridge. Then who is Mrs. Cadaver? I said. My little Margie, she said. She was a Berkway too, and she's a cadaver, and now she's a cadaver. I said to Mr. Berkway, Mrs. Cadaver is your sister? We're twins, Mr. Berkway said. When they had driven away, I knocked at Phoebe's door, but there was no answer. At home, I dialed Phoebe's number over and over. No answer. The next day at school, I was relieved to see Phoebe. Where were you? I said. I have something to tell you. She turned away. I don't want to talk about it, she said. I do not wish to discuss it. I couldn't figure out what was the matter with her. It was a terrible day. We had tests in math and science. At lunch, Phoebe ignored me. Then came English. Mr. Berkway skipped into the room. People were gnawing on their fingers and tapping their feet and wriggling around and generally getting ulcers, wondering if Mr. Berkway was going to read from the journals. I stared at him. He and Margaret Cadaver were twins? Was that possible? The most disappointing part of that piece of knowledge was that he was not going to fall in love with Mrs. Cadaver and marry her and take her away. Mr. Berkway opened the cupboard, pulled out the journals, slipped the yellow paper over the cover of one and read, This is what I like about Jane. She's smart, but doesn't act like she knows everything. She is cute. She smells good. She is cute. She makes me laugh. She is cute. I got a prickly feeling up and down my arms. I wondered if Ben had written this about me. But then I realized that Ben didn't even know me when he wrote this journal. A little buzz was going around the room as people shifted in their seats. Christy was smiling, Megan was smiling, Beth Ann was smiling, Mary Lou was smiling. Every girl in the room was smiling. Each girl thought that this had been written about her. I looked carefully at each of the boys. Alex was gazing nonchalantly at Mr. Bergway. Then I saw Ben. He was sitting with his hands over his ears, staring down at his desk. The prickly feeling traveled all the way up to my neck and then went skipping down my spine. He did write that, but he did not write it about me. Mr. Bergway exclaimed, "Oh, love, oh, life." Sighing, he pulled out another journal and read, "Jane doesn't know the first thing about boys. She once asked me what kisses taste like, so you could so you could tell she hadn't so you could tell that she hadn't ever kissed anyone. I told her that they taste like chicken, and she believed me. She's so dumb sometimes." Mary Lou Finney jumped out of her chair. "You cabbage head," she said to Beth Ann. "You beef brain." Beth Ann wound the strand of hair around her finger. Mary Lou said, "I did not believe you, and I do know what they taste like, and it isn't chicken." Ben drew a cartoon of two stick figures kissing. In the air over their heads was a cartoon bubble with a chicken saying, "Bawk, bawk, bawk." Mr. Bergway turned a few pages in the same journal and read, "I hate doing this. I hate to write. I hate to read. I hate journals. I especially hate English, where teachers only talk about idiot symbols. I hate that idiot poem about the snowy woods, and I hate it when people say the woods symbolize death or beauty or sex or any old thing you want. I hate that. Maybe the woods are just woods." Beth Ann stood up. "Mr. Bergway," she said, "I do hate school. I do hate books. I do hate English. I do hate symbols, and I most especially hate these idiot journals." There was a hush in the room. Mr. Bergway stared at Beth Ann for a minute, and in that minute I was reminded of Mrs. Cadaver. For that brief time, his eyes looked just like hers. I was afraid he was going to strangle Beth Ann, but then he smiled, and his eyes became friendly, enormous cow eyes once again. I think he hypnotized her, because Beth Ann sat down slowly. Mr. Bergway said, "Beth Ann, I know exactly how you feel. Exactly. I love this passage." "You do?" she said. "It's so honest." I had to admit, you couldn't get more honest than Beth Ann telling her English teacher that she hated symbols and English and idiot journals. Mr. Bergway said, "I used to feel exactly like this. I could not understand what all the fuzz was about symbols." He rummaged around in his desk. "I want to show you something." He was pulling papers out and flinging them around. Finally, he held up a picture. "Ah, here it is. Dynamite. What is this?" he asked Ben. Ben said, "It's a vase, obviously." Mr. Bergway held the drawing in front of Beth Ann, who looked as if she might cry. Mr. Bergway said, "Beth Ann, what do you see?" A little tear dropped down on her cheek. "It's okay, Beth Ann. What do you see?" "I don't see any idiot vase," she said. "I see two people. They're looking at each other." "Right," Mr. Bergway said. "Bravo." "I'm right. Bravo." Ben said, "Huh? Two people?" I was thinking the same thing myself. What two people? Mr. Bergway said to Ben, "And you were right too. Bravo." He asked everyone else, "How many see a vase?" About half the class raised their hands. "And how many see two faces?" The rest of the class raised their hands. Then Mr. Bergway pointed out how you could see both. If you looked only at the white part in the center, you could clearly see the vase. If you looked only at the dark parts on the side, you could see two profiles. The curvy sides of the vase became the outline of two heads facing each other. Mr. Bergway said that the drawing was a bit like symbols. Maybe the artist only intended to draw a vase, and maybe some people look at this picture and see only that vase. That is fine, but if some people look at it and see faces, what is wrong with that? It is faces to that person who is looking at it. And what is even more magnificent, you might see both. Beth Ann said, "Two for your money?" "Isn't it interesting?" Mr. Berkeley said, "to find both? Isn't it interesting to discover that snowy woods could be death and beauty and even, I suppose, sex? Wow, literature." "Did he say sex?" Ben said, copying the drawing. I thought Mr. Berkeley was finished with the journals for that day, but he made a great show of closing his eyes and pulling something from near the bottom of bottom of the stack. She popped blackberries into her mouth, then she looked all around. It was mine. I could hardly bear it. She took 2 steps up to the maple tree and threw her arms around it and kissed it. People were giggling. I thought I could detect a small dark stain as from a blackberry kiss. Ben looked at me from across the room. After Mr. Berkeley read about my mother's blackberry kiss, he read about how I kissed a tree and how I have kissed all different kinds of trees since then, and how each tree has a special taste all its own, and mixed in with a taste is the taste of blackberries. By now, because both Ben and Phoebe were staring at me, everyone else stared too. "She kisses trees," Megan said. I might have died right then and there if Mr. Berkeley had not immediately picked up another journal. He stabbed his finger into the middle of the page and read, I am very concerned about Mr. Berkeley stared down at the page. It looked as if he couldn't read the handwriting. He started again. I am very concerned about Mrs. Corpse. Her suspicious behavior suggests that she has murdered her own husband. Phoebe's eyes blinked rapidly. Go on, Ben said. Finish. You could tell that Mr. Berkeley was regretting that he had ever started this business with the journals, but all around the room people were shouting, "Yes, finish!" And so he reluctantly continued, "I believe she has buried him in her backyard." When the bell rang, people went berserk. Wow, a murder? Who wrote that? And is it real? I was out of the room faster than anything, chasing after Phoebe. Megan called out after me, "You kiss trees?" I tore out of the building. No, Phoebe. Idiot journals, I thought. Golden idiot journals.